Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sessions with Paula. So today I have a very special guest. I met Rachel at a pop-up shop, Sex on the Beach, which is created by Sex Down South. And when I met her, she attended my workshop and we started talking, and she's a sex therapist in Broward, which sex therapists are hard to find, people. So when I found her, I was like, oh my God, I want to keep you on. I want to have you on sessions. And here she is. Yes. And not only that, but Rachel is from Jamaica. So diversity, guys. Yes, woo-woo. Because representation matters. Guys, so let me start by introducing her. So Rachel has a passion for empowering ambitious women and committed couples through a journey of love and healing to rekindle passion and foster a deeper connection within themselves and their intimate relationships. She is the founder of Infinite Intimacy, where she offers compassionate therapeutic services, comprehensive workshops, and retreats to help clients develop the confidence and courage to show up as themselves in life and in their relationships. Rachel understands how difficult it can be to balance the many demands that careers, families, and partnerships can entail, and believes that everyone deserves to live a life filled with passion and pleasure. As a licensed marriage and family therapist with a certification in sex therapy, Rachel is a true expert in intimacy. Love it. Welcome. And I love the name of her practice, Infinite Intimacy, because guys, it can be done. So today we're going to take on a topic that I'm sure comes to your practice often. Rachel, it comes to my practice a lot. Low libido, right? Low libido, decreased appetite or wanting sex, decreased sexual drive. And, this is something that we hear so often. Then when we start to dig deeper, there's so many complexities to this topic. So let's start with, what do you think are the causes of low libido?
There's so many things, because when we talk about our sexual self is so nuanced, right? And there's so many different elements that play a role in our arousal and desire. In my practice, what I see often, we are stressed, we're overwhelmed, we're burnt out, we're so disconnected from our bodies. We are just, so consumed by this crazy, hectic, chaotic world that we're in that we forget about this part of ourselves, and we don't tend to it, and we don't nurture it. And that's what I loved about your workshop at Sex on the Beach, because you talked about our erotic garden and how do we plant these seeds and how do we nurture them so that they can grow,
Yes. And Rachel, when you say that, because guys, when I talk about the erotic garden, this is also the work of Emily Nagoski. And in erotic garden, right, like before we even know that we're sexual, before we're even in our first relationship, so many things have already been planted without our awareness, right? So when we think about body and stress, and even I love what you said about everybody deserves pleasure and play, and we forget how to be playful because we're so consumed by everything that's going on. How can people differentiate? Because of course, Rachel, we know that there's ebbs and flows, right? That sometimes we're not going to feel desire for certain things because we're stressed. If you took on a new job, if you just had a baby, if you had a loss in the family. So how could people differentiate when, okay, this is becoming an issue versus this is just a natural thing that we're experiencing as a relationship?
Absolutely. So when we think about the natural variations, I think a lot of people also don't know that there is a limerence phase to relationships. And so I think of limmer like glimmer, right? It's kind of like the honeymoon phase, but it has nothing to do with marriage. And so this is a time in the relationship, typically the first 6 months, maybe up to a year, that couples describe the most vibrant, exciting sexual relationship. Why? Because our sexual self thrives off of curiosity, mystery, adventure, the pushing of boundaries, right? And so when we're first getting to know somebody, we're super curious. Oh, who are you? What are you about? Where are your hot spots? If I touch you here, what happens? We're so drawn in. And then after we get a little comfortable in our relationships, we start making assumptions. And once we start making those assumptions of, oh, I already know what's going to do it for her. I already know if I touch him here, this is exactly what's going to happen, right? We stop getting curious. And so we don't draw into our partners in the same way, right? So when we think about desire, this drawing into, we lose that over time. And so that's a natural variation, but when it becomes a problem is when we get stuck in certain patterns. Yes. Right? And so when we see kind of like the same pattern of things coming up, and when we're not viewing our intimate relationship as a priority, right? It's on the back burner. We're taking care of the kids. We're, so engulfed in our career. We have all these other things going on that we just neglect this part of ourselves. And so there are these natural variations, but then it becomes a problem when we get stuck in that disconnect.
Oh my God, guys. We are all about patterns in our field.
Yes.
If you see a pattern, it's a thing.
Yes.
And I think sometimes, couples have this idea that I want sex to be like the way it was in the beginning. So I love what you're bringing in, Rachel, because if that's the goal, we're going to continue to fall short.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And when we talk a little bit about, right, like inviting yourself back into the present moment and understanding that sometimes this is going to happen. But, it's kind of like when people say, well, I'm in love with them, but I'm not.
I love them, but I'm not in love with them.
I'm not in love with them. That's another one. That's the same thing when we talk, well, I want it to be back like it was. But guys, curiosity. We are curious. We want to know what the other person, what do they like, what they don't. And the thing is, that a very common misconception is just like, I know everything about you, just like you said.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we stop wondering, we stop learning.
Exactly.
Right. And you're from Jamaica.
My family, yes.
Your family.
Yes.
So now we're talking about culture.
Yes.
Guys, because, in my culture, I'm Colombian. And I grew up kind of hearing, like, you have to quiet down your sexuality. Right. Like, the way that you dress, you don't want to be too provocative. This is the way that you got to sit. But then I hear my tias, my aunties say, oh, but if you're not having sex with your husband, he's going to change you for a younger model. He's going to find somebody else to please them. So it's very confusing because I'm supposed to quiet down my sexuality, but now I'm supposed to be a super sexual being. So that's another thing that I think we have to think about when it comes to low libido, right? Like, what were the messages that you got? Because if you see sex as an obligation, how many couples do you see, right? Two things that we hear. We're roommates and sex feels like a task or a chore.
Exactly.
So I wonder, in your culture, is it similar, the roles?
So the confusion that you're talking about, I experience a very similar confusion, but in a different way. So in my culture, our music, the way we dance, the way we move, the way we, go out and have a good time, sex is so salient, right? It's in the lyrics. And if you're not fully paying attention, you might miss it, right? Because there's these undertones of feeding these sexual messages. But then if I come out and ask you overtly about sex, if I use that word, it's like, oh, we don't talk about that. That is not something that we talk about. And one really incredible fact about Jamaica is that it actually has the most churches per capita. So so when we're talking about the religious messages, the religious undertones of this is a silent part of yourself, right? Like, this is a part that you do not let show. But then if we're going out, in the way that we dance, the moving of our hips, the what we call whining and just really enjoying ourselves, it is highly, highly sexual. So this dichotomy between, we're hearing all of these things in the music, but then culturally, from the religious aspect, this is not something that we talk about at all. Wow. And so that's part of the reason why I got into the field, was because
what inspired you to get into the field of sex?
So many different things, but I think it was really my high school experiences where it was like all of my peers were having sex and I was like, what is this? You know, I'm the oldest of two and first generation. And so a lot of my older cousins were in Jamaica. I didn't really have, you know, some contact, but not too much contact. And then I felt like it was like the blind leading the blind. You know, I would ask my friends and they didn't really have clear answers for me. And I'm like, well, you know, I need to figure this out. And
so you did.
So I did. Yes. And then college, I volunteered at a clinic for sexually abused children. And that just was so empowering to see how voices that are silenced and, you know, the empowerment piece was really what I was drawn to as well. You know, like knowledge is power. When we know about ourselves and our bodies and how it works and what's going on, then that's a source of power, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Thank you for sharing, because very similar to my culture, but a little bit different, right? When you talk about this really mixed messages.
Yes.
So guys, things to look out for when there is a pattern. I would also say when people are not only avoiding being sexual with one another, but also even talking about it, right? Because I think that's one. Hormonal changes. I think age, right? There's gradual changes that happen, but I think with men, we've given them a very one-sided message, especially the pharmaceutical companies. If you take Viagra or Cialis, you're going to have erections like you did when you were 20. You know, and maybe the erection happens, but it's not about pleasure. It's not about getting the job done. Anything else that we need to watch out for when people are having low libido, or not watch out for, but make sure that what else do we need to think of when we're thinking about low libido or lack of sexual drive?
The first thing I think of is our nervous system and how our nervous system becomes dysregulated through all types of different experiences. I mean, you're driving home from work and somebody cuts you off. You know, we go into survival mode so quickly and so often in our culture, right? This hustle culture and go, go, go and do, and we got to get things done. And so that keeps our nervous system revved up to the point where we can't even access pleasure if it's in front of us, right? If we experience touch when we're too revved up, it's not even going to translate as pleasure.
Not cause of then. Nothing is going to happen.
Exactly. So that is really one of the main things that I help my clients work through. We do breathing exercises to help to calm the nervous system. And I love to focus on sensuality versus sexuality, because I believe that sensuality is an incredible bridge into sexuality when we're able to feel into our bodies and get into our bodies, and that embodiment piece just helps to transcend, you know, everything else.
Yes, well, it's such a beautiful invitation, this idea of sensuality. And when we're in survival mode, guys, you know, there's no way that we can stop and pause. Depression, anxiety, I think anxiety also plays a big role.
Absolutely.
You know, for men, it's about performance. So it's about like, okay, the outcome, is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Because men have been taught, you know, I deal with a lot of men where it's like, well, if she didn't have an orgasm, or if she has an orgasm, it means that I did a good job. And then the woman feels so pressure, I must have an orgasm. And then we end up faking the good orgasm. Right?
Exactly.
Right? Tell us, where can you guide us? What are some things or some first steps that people need to take when they're noticing that their libido is a little bit lower, lack of sexual drive? What do we want to think about? What are some first things that they can start looking at?
First thing, the education is so important, right? Sex education, we don't have real comprehensive sex education. And I think the foundation is really understanding your desire style, your arousal style. It's understanding, you mentioned Emily Nagoski, Come As You Are is one of my favorite books ever, right? And she talks about the brakes and the accelerators. What are the things that are turning you off? What are some of the things that are turning you on? As we're talking about culturally, even to touch yourself, right? If we're talking about self-pleasure and solo sex, that's not for women. We do not touch down there. Those are our private parts, right? And so if you don't even know what does it for you, then how can you communicate that to your partner? So it's really getting to know your body and getting comfortable with your body, and then developing that comfort and security within your relationship so that you can actually talk about those things and open up the conversation.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yes.
And I think when we talk about, guys, because what you said, right, like in order for us to be able to do all of those beautiful things, we got to take out the weeds of the garden,
Yes.
right? Because if we were taught sex is not to be talked about, or masturbation shouldn't happen if you're in a relationship, right? Like, then how are we going to get to know ourselves? But what Rachel says is so beautiful, because how could we know what we like if we don't know what that is? And how do we learn how to ask for it?
Exactly.
I think that is a must in
Yes.
order to have a good sexual experience.
Exactly.
Rachel, thank you so much for your input. Something that you talked about that you teach in your practice, breathing exercises.
Yes.
Learning how to relax. Because guys, when we go to the doctor or when we're feeling stressed, people are like, just relax. It's not that easy. The mind and the body have to understand how to relax.
Yes.
You talked about Come As You Are. Love it.
Yes.
Another great book by Lori Brodo, Mindfulness Sex, or Better Sex Through Mindfulness.
Yes.
And both books, guys, have the workbook,
Yes.
which is a little bit shorter, and you get to write down things. I think those are really helpful. So all of these things, take them with you guys. And you know, one of the unfortunate things in our job is that sometimes people wait too long. Right? Like those patterns have been there for way too long. So I don't know, I would dare say 3 to 6 months that you're not having sex, but you're also not talking about it. It is time to seek the help of people like us. That's what we're here for, guys. That's what we did all this training to be able to help you in this way. Rachel, where can people find you?
InfiniteIntimacyTherapy.com is my website. And then my social media handles, Instagram specifically, Infinite Intimacy Therapy.
And retreats. I love the retreats. I don't know a lot of people that are doing them down here in South Florida.
Yes.
So any upcoming retreats, any retreats that you want to tell us about?
Yes. So my retreats are coming up next year. I have an incredible workshop coming up in February for couples, and I'm calling it the Art of Initiation. And we're going to be going through, you know, a bunch of different ways that we can experience foreplay. Later on in the year, I'm going to be doing a couples massage class, this idea of touch and how to really engage in sensual touch with our partners. And then I'm hoping to do a full couples retreat hopefully by November of next year. So I'm super excited. Yeah.
I love that movie, Couples Retreat. Right? Like, even though it's a movie, but guys, there's something to it. There's something about, sometimes that's the little oomph that we need in order to get this started. Thank you so much, Rachel. Guys, remember, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. We are here to provide you with good sex education, because as all of us know, this is lacking. Thank you for joining us today. Remember that I believe in the power of community. So if you have anyone that could use this information, please share it with them. See you soon.